Good evening, everyone. I'm Mark Judeman. I'm a board member of Arrow, and along with Helena Miller, who's our program manager for Arrow, we welcome you to tonight's Solar Ease workshop. And we'd like also to recognize and thank our partner organizations, Montana Renewable Energy Association, who's also going to be talking about their Soul Smart program, Missoula Federal Credit Union, the Sleeping Giant Citizens Council, and Montana Environmental Information Center. So please thank all of those folks for helping to put this on. Presenters this evening will include myself, my wife Kathy, Kalina, Ben Brower, I think Brian Fady from MEIC will be talking about MREA, and let's see, and Paul Herendine from Missoula Federal Credit Union. We'd also like to thank the installers who've come to talk tonight, mingle with you before and after this program. If you have any questions about getting solar installed, please stop by and talk with them. And you'll hear more details about the installers later in the program. You can ask questions during the presentation, but there will be time at the end, and it may be best to wait until that time to ask questions because your questions may be answered in the intervening presentations. So if you have a burning question, go ahead and ask it, but you may want to wait. Okay. Let me tell you briefly about Arrow. Arrow, also known as the Alternative Energy Resource Organization, is a grassroots, membership-based nonprofit, and we've been serving Montanans for almost 45 years. Our mission is to empower communities to nurture and provide a more sustainable Montana. And one of our strengths is our network of people, including members and partner organizations present in the room today. So as we get started, Kathy and I would actually like to talk about our personal solar story. And so we're going to talk real quickly about that, and then we'll get into some of the meaty presentations from the other presenters. Yes. Oh, and I should have put this up about Arrow. Okay, so our long-term family goal was to install solar PV at our home, both because that supports our environmental values and also because we'd like to move towards cost-effective energy independence. We worked with Jack Isbell at Solar Montana, and our experience with him was really excellent. We had Jack come out and do an analysis and provide a proposal, which in the spring of 2017, that was complete in the summer of 2017. Unfortunately, we weren't ready to go yet. We extended our garage so that we had more space for modules, and we completed the installation in the spring of 2018. Just quickly, here's some data, just to give you an example of the information you can get. We had a Solar Edge string inverter, and there are optimizers on each of the panels. So we get both information about our total production on the left there. This is a kind of a typical day without clouds. And then on the right, you see what each panel is producing. And you see that the colors kind of get darker to the right. And the reason for that is that there's a tree that's providing some shading. And so you see the effect of that tree. It's not a surprise to us, and we like the tree, but it is under some power lines. And so if the power company wants to take that tree out, we'll probably let them do it. On the bottom left is kind of our monthly production profile. And that was for July, I believe. And we produced almost 900 kilowatt hours during the month. Our consumption in the house is around, initially when I think we did the analysis with Jack, was around 300 kilowatt hours per month. Since then, we've had some additional load And so we're getting up, as you see down here on this display, around 368, almost 400. Yeah, that helps. Almost 400 kilowatt hours. So we're producing right now in the summer about twice as much as we're consuming.
Can you speak up or turn up the microphone?
Sure thing, I'm sorry. I'll just move this over here. Is that better? Okay. Yeah. Okay, and Kathy?
Well, let's see if I can.
Just one more slide. Look at that.
I don't know.
Technical difficulty. There we go.
All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about the economics of the system.
Speak louder.
Sure. I'm going to talk a little bit about the economics of the system. Our system is going to provide an 8.6 year payback time, and so this is going to eliminate the house electricity costs altogether for us, and we're going to be able to take advantage of both federal and state tax credits for the installation. There are, I will say, we still are going to have a Northwestern Energy bill. So our bill does not go away. There are something called electric delivery and service charges that are assessed by NWE. So we still have a small monthly bill, but there are advantages to being grid tied because we have security during periods of low solar production. So if I want coffee and the sun's not up yet, I can have coffee. Or if I'm trying to do laundry late at night and also charge my car, I can do that and do it successfully. So some good advantages there. We're expecting to add an electric car this fall, and we have now a plug-in hybrid car, and these are charged by the solar panels. These auto additions will optimize the use of the solar panels and the solar power that's being produced, plus we're going to be buying less gas. And then going forward, we're going to keep an eye on battery technology and consider buying batteries if that makes sense in the future.
Okay, for some reason, am I pushing the wrong button? Try that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I think Brian Fady is now going to talk about MREA and also the Salt Smart program.
Yeah, just real briefly, hi folks, my name is Brian Fady. I serve on the board of directors for the Montana Renewable Energy Association. MREA is one of the co-sponsors here. It focuses on advocacy for all renewable energies, but in particular, rooftop solar and the solar industry and solar customers here in Montana is certainly a specific group of folks that MREA looks to represent at the state legislature and at the Public Service Commission and fighting for the rights of those customers. And so we are a membership-based organization. We'd love to have you as a member. You can go to montanarenewables.org to find out more. And actually with that, I'll turn it over to Ben Brower to talk about Soul Smart.
Push the wrong button. There you go.
Great, thanks, Brian. How's the volume in the back, folks? Does that work for you? More? See if we can turn this up. Any better? Did that go up?
Maybe if you put it up on a chair.
I'll do that. Okay, we'll give that a whirl. My name is Ben Brower. I'm with the State Energy Office at the Department of Environmental Quality. We are an informational resource, provide information on a whole range of subjects from energy efficiency to electric vehicles, to renewable energy, and I specifically manage our state's alternative energy revolving loan program. I'm pinch hitting on this SolSmart slide here. Andrew with the Renewable Energy Association wasn't able to come over from Missoula today. But I just want to tell you briefly about that program. It's a Department of Energy, U.S. Department of Energy program that seeks to reduce the soft costs, if you will, of solar installations, the permitting costs, customer acquisition, utility outreach, a variety of different pieces, and it's one of the funding sources for this series tonight. So I'm going to jump into my presentation now, which is going to cover a whole range of different subjects. We're going to talk about just big picture, what does Montana's solar landscape look like? Is there actually enough sun here to really make solar work for a home power system? What are your goals? Is solar a good fit for you? I will say that I'm not here to sell you anything, and it's not a good fit for everyone, but we'll talk through what kind of situations make sense for solar, what don't, what to look out for as you shop for solar. We'll cover some basic terms, sample installations, a whole bunch of different things here. So I'm going to jump into it, as I said, with a quick discussion of what solar energy looks like in Montana by zooming back and looking at the United States. If you take a look, Montana's solar resource is good. Newsflash, this is not Arizona. It's also not Seattle. We're kind of right in the middle of things, and in some places in Montana, our solar resource is actually as good as Florida, for example. No surprises here either. The strongest sun in the state, the darker colors are in the eastern and southern parts of Montana. The northwest part of the state, the Flathead, of course, is a bit cloudier and therefore has less solar radiation. That's what this map is showing. If you wanted to stack up Montana cities against other cities around the country, the cities in blue bars on the left are cities in Montana stacked up against Napa, Charlotte, Phoenix, Houston, a few others. And you can see that the solar resource, this is a measure of how many kilowatt hours you would get out of a certain area. Again, we'll get into the terms in a minute here, but it really, it's kind of right middle of the pack compared to other major cities in the United States. Over the course of the last 10 years, the big story in solar has been the dropping costs in installations. The yellow line here depicts that dropping price for installation of solar, and the blue bars are the basically amount of solar power that's been installed year over year, just annual installations. This isn't cumulative. In Montana, we've really seen a similar trend as those prices have dropped. Installations, and these are just installations of systems on Northwestern's grid, home power systems, small commercial systems, rooftop solar, backyard solar panels, have kept going at quite a steady clip. Again, this is just annual installations year over year. And there's one other little story that this data tells, and that's that in the early days of home power systems, there was a pretty even mix of wind and solar installations that people were installing. The wind in yellow there, there's a couple of small hydro systems that you don't even see in this graph. Wind has really fallen out of favor as the price of solar came down and started competing very favorably with small wind energy systems. There's still a few applications where wind might make sense, but talk to me afterwards and I'll probably talk you out of it. It's a technology that needs a lot of taking care of, and you really have to be the right person in the right place for it to work. The other big story about solar in Montana in the last couple of years has been the construction of a handful of utility scale solar farms. And I've got some pictures later in the slideshow to give you a sense of scale and how these compare with a rooftop system. But in 2017, 6 of these 2 to 3 megawatt systems were installed around the state. You may have driven out Green Meadow Drive, and on your left-hand side as you're headed out of town, there's that big solar array up on the hill there. That's one of these 6 that were installed, and these are selling power straight to Northwestern Energy. So next up, I'm going to talk about solar goals. Why do people do this, and is it really a good fit for you? There's a lot of reason people go solar. People, as Mark and Kathy explained, they go solar because they're interested in reducing their environmental footprint or reducing their emissions profile from the power that they buy. they may be interested in truly living on their own, self-reliant. Those top two pictures are pictures of off-grid solar installations, one up the North Fork of the Flathead on the left-hand side and one out in north central Montana. You might be looking to electrify everything in your home. Maybe you're considering a net zero home where you produce all of the energy over the course of the year that you use. This home in the lower left is a home in Helena that has an all-electric heating system, cooling system, no gas, all electric, and solar panels that are enough to provide all the energy that they need over the course of the year. Or maybe you're just looking to, chip away at your power bill a little bit, and you're interested in this as a long-term investment. Some people are really interested in the technology. Some people want to be prosumers, if you will. They want to be more active consumers of their energy resources. I would note that before we get too far down the solar rabbit hole, which is a fun place to go, I'd like to make a pitch for thinking seriously about energy efficiency measures before you get too far. And what you'll find is that energy efficiency can often deliver those same objectives: lower power bills, a lower environmental footprint, more self-reliance, and sometimes at a lower cost. The first real step in energy efficiency is get an energy audit. Northwestern Energy provides free audits if you haven't had one in your home before. And then take a look at the basics: air sealing, insulation, efficient lighting, LEDs, and Energy Star appliances are sort of four of the main pieces of energy efficiency, and we can talk more about that afterwards if you'd like. So let's jump back down the solar rabbit hole. For me and my family, we decided to go solar for a number of reasons that I've already discussed. And our installation was a small 6 panels on our shed in the garage. And the other reason I really did this is because I like to drive heavy equipment every chance I get. Mostly I'm a desk guy, but here's me trenching the line between our house and the shed, so I got my hands dirty, which was fun. I'm one of those people that likes to see the data, that likes to know how much energy is coming off my solar panels. And as Mark mentioned, a lot of these systems, just about any of these systems these days, come with a really good way of visualizing how much energy you're producing. This is one of those days that we all dream of as solar homeowners, where the sun's out and you've got this perfect production curve. And it's neat to step back and look at the production from your solar array over the course of several weeks. This happens to be a couple weeks and hourly production from our solar array. Now, that really dark day in the middle of July looked like this. And that's one of those days where you start to appreciate the utility a little bit more and the service that they're providing. So, terminology. It's worth understanding some basic terms that are thrown around a lot as you're starting to look into solar and as you're talking to solar businesses. Before I get too far, though, I just want to take a quick poll. How many of you already have a solar installation at your home or your business? Anybody here? 1, 2 in the back? Okay. How many of you have already received a bid or have already started seriously, talking to a solar business? Okay, great. How many of you are interested in solar for your business rather than just your home? Okay, great. All right, that just helps me. And one more quick question before I get too far. How many of you are Northwestern Energy customers? And how many of you are served by a rural electric co-op? Anybody? Okay, that simplifies the conversation a little bit as well. Okay, so basic terms. Kilowatt and kilowatt hour. You're going to see these terms thrown around a lot. Sometimes they're used interchangeably, but they mean different things, and it's important to understand the difference between them. Kilowatts are a unit of power, or the potential for your, in this case, solar panel to generate. How much power can your solar panel generate at one moment? Kilowatt hour is a unit of energy. Basically, how much work can that solar array do over the course of time? So, for example, if we say we've got a 5 kilowatt solar array that's generating energy at its peak potential for 2 hours, then you would get 5 times 2, 10 kilowatt hours of energy. Now, kilowatt hours is the unit of electricity, the unit of energy that you pay for on your power bill. And so that's the term that you're probably most familiar with. You can look at this another way. If you've got a 500 watt or a 0.5 kilowatt heater that's running for 2 hours, it would use up 1 kilowatt hour of energy. So there's a lot of ways we can reconfigure these kinds of equations. On the power side, people talk about megawatts, they talk about kilowatts, and they talk about watts. And it's a pretty easy conversion to go from megawatts to kilowatts, kilowatts to watts. Same thing on the energy side, megawatt hours, kilowatt hours. And really it is, really it's kilowatts and kilowatt hours that we'll be talking about, as long as we're talking about residential and small commercial solar. Now, as an example, on this printout from my home installation, you can see that on Wednesday, July 11th, we produced 11.9 kilowatt hours. That's the unit of energy that we produced over the course of the day, and the peak output was 1.48 kilowatts. That was a sunny day, relatively cool, the panels are working efficiently, and that was the maximum output at any given moment. That's a pretty small installation, by the way. So what does this stuff look like? I'm sure you've seen them around town, but let's just start with the big things. This is a 3 megawatt or 3,000 kilowatt utility scale solar installation. This is actually just a rendering of what one of those things look like. But again, this is like the utility scale solar farm out on Green Meadow or out in Canyon Creek. If we step down to the next scale, Northwestern Energy about a year ago built this 385 kilowatt community solar pilot project outside of Bozeman. If you step down one more scale, Flathead Electric and a handful of other rural electric co-ops have recently built these community scale shared solar installations. Basic concept here is that multiple people subscribe to the output from one or more solar panels in this larger array. We're seeing these being developed in co-op territory. Right now there isn't a regulatory structure through which Northwestern is offering this kind of installation. It's not available right now. If you jump down to the next scale, commercial buildings can install, or even in residential or individual residents could install up to 50 kilowatts of solar. That's the maximum size if you're going to stay connected to the grid under what's called a net metering arrangement. Here's a 13 kilowatt business installation over in Bozeman. Here's a pretty typical residential scale installation, 7.5 kilowatts on top of a roof. Here's a ground mounted 4.5 kilowatt array over in Missoula. And down at the smaller end of things is a 2.5 kilowatt off-grid installation installed in Lame Deer. A bunch of these are projects that we actually financed through our loan program. What's interesting about solar installations is that they all share the same basic components. There's the solar panels, there's the racking equipment, and then there's a piece of equipment called an inverter that converts DC, direct current electricity coming off of those solar panels, into AC, or alternating current, that can be used in your home and is compatible with the grid electricity that Northwestern Energy is selling you. It can either look like this. It's called a string inverter, typically on the wall inside or outside of your house, or it might look like one of these little boxes, a micro inverter that's installed actually on the back of the solar panel itself and converts the electricity right on the spot there. There are advantages and disadvantages to each different approach. The solar panels, or solar modules as they're sometimes called, there's basically two flavors. There's a 72 cell or the 60 cell. Basically the 72 cell are more efficient, they produce more energy, they're a little bit bigger. You might see a proposal or a bid with 72 watt or 72 cell modules. You might see one with 60 cell modules. And the basic output or generating capacity of one of these individual panels is going to range from 275 watts up to 350 watts, kind of in that range. Typically, you'll see something around the 300 watt range for an individual solar panel. And a larger array, of course, is made up of multiple solar panels. This is, again, a pretty typical residential scale installation, 7.8 kilowatts, and this was made up of 27 individual panels, each of them 290 watts. So the other basic components you'll see in an installation is a manual disconnect switch that utility linemen can use if there's some emergency and for some reason they need to come and actually disconnect your installation from the grid. I will point out that all inverters, microinverters or string inverters, are built with an automatic disconnect system, so that if the power goes out, your inverter will see that something's wrong and it will stop working. It won't send electricity into your home or into the grid. And that's just to protect linemen who are working on the lines from power coming from unidentified sources. This utility manual disconnect switch is redundant on top of that automatic disconnect built into your inverter. So if you want to go solar, just realize that if you're going to be doing a grid-tied system, if you're going to remain connected to the grid, you're not going to have power during an outage unless you also have a supplemental battery backup system. The other major component of these systems is your meter. Doesn't look too different from your existing utility meter. This one has a little sticker on it that says net, and it is calculating our total net usage, net of consumption and production from our solar array. And that'll make a little bit more sense in a second when I get into how a net metering system, what that arrangement looks like with the utility. So I'm going to jump into questions that you should be asking if you're considering going solar. What do you need to be thinking about? And these are a few of the questions that I like to start with. Are you thinking about going on-grid or going off-grid? Did I already ask? Is anyone here considering an off-grid system? Okay, great. Your goals will change, of course, depending on whether you plan to remain connected to the utility or whether you're going to be going off-grid entirely. Another big question to ask is what your utility provider's policies are and what their net metering policies are. So first of all, what does net metering mean? Net metering is basically a billing arrangement between you and your utility. And how this works is the sun, in this case, is shining on your solar panels. And your solar panels are going to generate electricity, DC electricity, that's going to be converted into AC electricity by that little black box over there. And that's going to go straight into your house. And if you're running your toaster oven or you've got some lights on and you've got solar power coming off your panels, your appliances in your home are going to be using up that electricity as it comes out of your inverter. If you have more electricity coming off your solar array than you're using in your home, then that excess electricity is going to go backwards through your net meter and out to utility. And the Northwestern Energy will then push it down the line and basically sell those electrons to another customer. As your meter spins backwards, if you will, then you generate a credit on your bill. And that credit on your bill for the excess production rolls over from month to month for 12 months in a billing cycle. Just to see what a bill actually looks like in this situation, you're still going to get a power bill, but the big difference you might see is if you've got a solar array that's big enough to offset all of your monthly usage. This installation happened in March. June, July, and August, there was no usage recorded by that meter, and instead what we saw was credit pushed over to the next subsequent months. As Kathy explained, as a net metering customer, you're still going to pay the basic fixed service charge. In this case, right now, it's $4.10 a month, and so that's that. Electric service, delivery service is $4.10. That's the fixed charge. But this customer's not paying anything for supply service that month. The bill will also indicate how much excess electricity you've generated that's being carried over month to month. In this box at the bottom, 259 kilowatt hours are being pushed forward to the next month. So just to reiterate some of the basics here. You're going to be credited at the retail rate. So right now it's about 11.5 cents per kilowatt hour. You're going to get a kilowatt hour credit on your bill for every extra kilowatt hour you push out to the utility. Those credits, again, carry forward for 12 months, and at the end of that 12-month billing cycle, which usually for solar customers is April, then you'll forfeit any excess credits you generated, which is certainly a financial, incentive to size your system appropriate to how much usage you have over the course of the year, to not oversize your system, because you'll basically be sacrificing those extra energy credits to the utility. I should point out that the utility is not going to write you a check for excess generation. You're never going to get a check in the mail for excess energy. The statute has a 50 kilowatt cap on net metering systems, whether you're an individual or a business. And a couple other important pieces about net metering that are worth understanding is that in the 2017 legislature, the legislature ordered a cost-benefit study of net metering to evaluate what the energy is worth to other utility customers, to the utility. That study is going to be refereed ultimately by the Public Service Commission, which regulates Northwestern Energy. They, at the end of that study, will have the option to decide whether or not it's allowable to create a whole separate rate structure for customer generators or net metering customers. That's likely to unfold in the course of the next general rate case, the next big rate case for Northwestern Energy in the next year or so. Nothing is set in stone about this yet. It's hard to imagine quite yet what the outcome might be. It's also worth noting that same legislation included essentially a grandfathering clause for existing net metering customers or anyone who signs up for net metering before the Public Service Commission would approve a new rate class for customer generators. After that time, if there is a whole new rate structure for customer generators, then if you sign up after the fact, then you'd be put in that new rate class. So it's some level of certainty for customers who sign up now. It's hard to tell what net metering will look like after the Public Service Commission evaluates it in more detail. So back to our planning questions. Another big question is where you're going to put solar panels. And what is your roof like? Do you have shading issues to worry about? Shading's a real concern, something to watch out for. This is maybe not an optimally sited array, at least in the morning when this picture was taken. But a good solar site assessment by a solar business will tell you you're going to have this much impact from shading. You're going to lose this much production over the course of the year. So just go into this eyes wide open. It does not to say that if you have some shade on your roof that you can't install solar there, but make sure it's really clear from your solar installer, from the businesses you're getting bids from, how much that's going to impact your overall production and what are the measures they're going to put in place to ensure that the rest of your solar panels are still producing if one or two of them are shaded. Typically, we would suggest that if you're thinking about putting up solar panels, then you face them straight south. But that's not an absolute rule. This is an installation in Helena that has solar panels on just about every angle that you could possibly imagine of this house. It's a small house, and it's difficult to see all the different installations, but you can see just the corner of the array way over on that far side, and I think that's the south-facing aspect. This roof here, of course, is more, what am I facing? Easterly facing. And then, again, hard to see it, but you can just see the black edges of the solar panels here facing both east and west. So it's certainly possible to get decent production out of east or west-facing solar arrays, especially if you're dealing with a relatively low-pitched roof. But again, be sure that any bid you get from a solar installer would break out each of those different roof aspects separately and show you how much energy you're going to get from your west-facing versus your east-facing versus your south-facing, and then have them put it all together for you.
So in that arrangement,
Sure.
they have them on the house and the garage,
Yep.
and that on the garage, the energy produced is still working in the house.
Yeah, great question. So, in an installation like that where you have solar kind of all over the house in different places and on the garage, in this case, all of these systems are wired back together and they all go, probably they all go to one inverter or a couple of big inverters. Or they all come back to one central tie-in to your electrical panel. If you had a much bigger piece of property with, say, a couple of meters, you had a house metered separately from your irrigation pump down the road, you would have to have separately metered solar installations at each of those different meters. You couldn't have one large array at your house that also offset the kilowatt hours you were billed for on your irrigation pump. Sort of a different scenario than you're talking about, but just to address that as we got into that issue. Other installations, people get creative. This is a Canopy installation. This was the best place these people had for solar, is they built a little racking system on the side of their house. Another important consideration is your roof life. These things will last a long time, easily 25 years, probably more like 30, 35 years, and there's solar panels up in space that are still floating around after 45 years and still producing electricity. So just take that into account when you're talking about an installation, that you're likely making a 20 or 25 year investment. If you're going to need to replace your roof before then, just take that into consideration and be prepared that your re-roofing is going to cost some extra labor to move those solar panels and put them back. It's kind of interesting to see that the shingles underneath this roof are actually doing great, but the shingles around it, or underneath the solar panels, are doing great, but the rest of the roof could use some help. Other big questions here are how big to go, and what is that based on? A lot of people will make it based on how much money they have available for solar. A lot of people are just shooting to cover 100% of their annual usage. Sometimes it's just a question of how much space you have. Whoa. That's not what I meant to do. Where are we? Okay, sorry for the detour. So let's get into that question of sizing. The first question to answer when you're sizing a solar installation is how much energy you use over the course of the year. And you can do that by looking at your bill over the last couple of years, or ideally a couple of years, add them all up and figure out how much energy you're using over the course of the year. And if you want to do some back of the napkin kind of math, here's an equation you can use to calculate how big a solar array would have to be in order to cover your annual usage. And this is sort of optimally sized, optimally located, no shading. You'd plug in how much energy you're using, divide it by the total number of hours in a year, and then divide it by what's called a capacity factor, or basically the percent of the time that the solar array is producing at full capacity if you put all of its production together over the course of the year. And what you get would be the output in kilowatts. So let's take a typical Northwestern Energy customer who would use 9,000 kilowatt hours over the course of the year. Do the math, and what you get is a 6.85 kilowatt array. There's other ways to look at this or sort of back into this number. This is a really good resource from the National Renewable Energy Lab called PV Watts. And instead of putting in how much kilowatt hours you use, what you can do is plug in a kilowatt rating for an array and then do the math the other direction. In this case, I plugged in 6.85 kilowatts and it spit out 9,000 kilowatt hours, or a little bit more than that. So again, a good tool from NREL PV Watts if you want to play around with some numbers from the other direction. If you're curious about typical costs for a system, there are a lot of factors that go into the cost of a solar installation. The type of roof, whether they're going to have to be up there, on ladders, or whether they can do the work from the ground. A whole lot of different factors, how far they're running your electricity. But for some average numbers, this is data from across the whole United States, the residential market. Right now, the market is sitting at around between $2.50 and $3 per watt. That dollars per watt metric is something that you will often see or could use if you're trying to compare different bids from different solar installers. So if you want to get the dollars per watt for an installation, it's a pretty straightforward calculation. But you plug in the estimated dollars per watt. Sorry, if we're just trying to estimate your installed cost, okay? Then let's plug in an estimated dollars per watt. And like I said, right now it's in the sort of $250 to probably $350, $4 per watt for a smaller system. Your dollars per watt is going to be cheaper, lower for a larger system. I'll just jump to the example here. So let's use $2.80 per watt times the size of the array in watts, so 6.85 times 1,000 to get it in watts, would give you your total installed cost of around $19,000, and that's before any incentives. You could also, of course, reverse this if you wanted to get an output of the dollars per watt of an estimate that you were given. So let's just look at a couple estimates side by side. If they said your total installed cost is going to be $14,955 or $13,750, then you could run the math backwards, and that'll give you your dollars per watt. So you could do basically an apples to apples comparison between two different installations. There are a lot of other factors that go into installations, such as the warranty for your solar panels and the kind of inverter that are used. But if you want a rough comparison between two different bids, this is one way of doing that. So how to find an installer. There are a few good resources out here. Of course, there are a couple businesses in the room that are worth talking to tonight. It's always worth getting a couple of bids, just like doing any other work on your home. There are a couple of resources out there. I would make a quick note that we don't endorse, we don't pre-qualify or certify solar installation businesses, but Northwestern Energy has a qualified installer list of solar installers. MREA has a list of their member installers. You could also go to this NABCEP organization, or of course ask your friends who have solar. In a solar site visit, what should you be looking for? At a minimum, your installer coming to do a bid would look at any potential shading. This is a tool that's used by installers to measure how much shading impact there is on your installation. They should look at any structural issues with your roof or with your garage or with your shed. If you're talking about doing a ground-mounted system, then they should know what they're going to be digging into. What's the electrical tie-in? This is also a really good time to talk about what the installation will look like. And in all likelihood, you'll get a bid that will give sort of a rough layout of your array. But there are some real aesthetic concerns to take into consideration here as the owner of this system. And there are some installations that look better than others. And sometimes it's just installers trying to fit a bunch of panels on a roof because that's what the customer wanted, and sometimes they have to work around plumbing vents and all sorts of weird stuff. But for example, down here in the corner, you shouldn't be surprised if that's what your solar installation is going to have to look like because there's a couple of plumbing vents in the middle of your roof. It might not be optimal to have the extra racking sticking out there, but maybe that's what they had to do in order to hit a structural roofing frame. But talk this stuff over with your installer. Where's the electrical run going to go? Is it going to go over your roof and down the side of your house, or can they go into your attic? It's worth asking for spec sheets from your installer that will give the actual warranty information for the equipment that they're selling you. It's typical for solar panels to have a 25-year power production warranty. And that's basically an assurance that this panel will keep running at a certain capacity for 25 years. Not its full capacity, it will degrade somewhat over time. And it's also typical that they'll have a product warranty, which is a different piece. Typical product warranty is more in the range of 10 or 12 years, although there are some solar panels that you can buy that have a 20 or 25-year product warranty as well. Certainly ask for what the workmanship warranty is and those kind of things from your installer as well. I'm going to touch just briefly on tax credits and our loan program that we manage, and then I'll turn it over to Paul Herendeen to sort of wrap it all up in terms of the home economics of what your installation might look like. There's a couple important tax credits to know about. First off is the federal investment tax credit, or solar investment tax credit, and that's 30% of the total system cost. Talk to your tax preparer to make sure that you actually have the right tax setup to be able to take advantage of this before you get too far down this path. It's worth noting that this tax credit will start to step down and will eventually sunset for residential customers after the year 2021. The other side is the Montana tax credits. There's a handful of tax credits listed here. Energy conservation tax credit, certainly worth knowing about, but for a solar installation, the alternative energy systems tax credit is the one you would be looking for on your tax return, and that's $500 per individual taxpayer, up to $1,000 per household, and it applies to a number of different technologies. And then lastly, our alternative energy revolving loan program. If you're looking for financing for your solar installation, certainly feel free to visit with me. We offer zero down, low interest loans for solar installations and other alternative energy technologies. And I'd be happy to talk over the details with you. It's also certainly worth talking to your local bank or other lenders, and more and more private lenders are getting into the business of helping to finance solar installations on homes. We can also finance other technologies. We can also finance energy conservation measures if they're done in coordination with an alternative energy system. For example, this fellow did both solar on his shed and then went way beyond code with his insulation in this new shed. These folks did both a solar thermal system for heating their water and a solar electric system, both through our loan program. So I'm running a little long, so I'm going to wrap it up there and pass it over to Paul. Let's let Paul go, and then we'll open it up for questions in case he answers any questions you might have right now. So thanks.
Well, I'm going to go handheld with this so I can gesticulate. I'm going to need to turn that down a little bit. Is this extremely loud in the back? Sound good? Great. If anybody has any trouble, let me know. So I am Paul Herendeen. I'm with the Missoula Federal Credit Union. My position there is the Director of Impact Market Development. It's kind of a free-ranging position to basically work on programs that advance our social mission. Part of that work is on renewable energy and energy efficiency. That's actually what I got into this doing. So I am representing the organization here, so I do feel I should say that we do also offer a loan for solar. It's an unsecured loan. We try to be competitive with the DEQ. It goes up to 15 years, $25,000. There is a $200 origination fee, but that's it. It's really easy to use. You can apply online. Give us a call. We'll be happy to talk about it. And I can give you more details later. That's all I'm going to say about that. The DEQ program is also great. They do really good work there. So what I am going to talk about is how would I approach this as a homeowner if I were thinking about putting solar on my house. This isn't because I'm a particularly interesting person, but I have spent an awful lot of time thinking about this question. And in fact, what happened is I started in this position with the credit union, and I was the solar guy, right? So people would ask me these questions like, does this make sense? Should I wait for the prices to go down? Should I buy it now? Stuff like that. And I found that I didn't actually have great answers for them. So I started kind of, pulling at the string of the problem. And the next thing I knew, I'd been at it for a long time. I'd written this big complicated spreadsheet. I'd read a lot of papers. I'd spent a lot of time thinking about it. And at that point, I figured, what the heck, I might as well go ahead and just write this up and publish it. I already did all the work. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about comes out of this report that we published last year on how to do financial analysis of residential solar. There's some paper copies out by the door. And to accompany that, I wrote a spreadsheet. I wrote up a little one-page thing about how to evaluate solar bids. And this is all available on our website. And part of what I found with this was that there's no one answer, right? There's no one way to think about the financial performance of solar. There's just a lot of kind of related questions. How much money am I going to save? When is this going to pay for itself? Things like that. So basically what I thought I would do here is I'm just going to run through, how I would go about thinking about this stuff if I were going to get this done on my house. So to help do that, Solar Montana mocked up a little quote for me, and I'm going to kind of run through that, thinking about how I would approach it. So first of all is just evaluating the quote. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Like I said, I did write up a little one-page sheet about this, but just a couple things to think about. You want to be sure that it includes everything, right? There's a lot of stuff that goes into a solar installation. Do you need permits? Do you need a structural review of your home? Do you need an interconnection fee? I don't even know what they all are. I don't want to know. I want to just write one check that's going to take me, from start to finish. So be sure that the quote includes everything. You want to be sure that it's based on your house and your electrical usage. As Mark mentioned, there's a little bit of shade on one corner of his array. You want to be sure that that's all taken into account. You want to be sure that the system is properly sized to match your electricity usage. Like Ben said, you're never going to actually get a check from the utility. The most you can do is to offset 100% of your use. And importantly, you want to be sure it's matched to your electric rate. It looked like everybody in the room is on Northwestern, so that makes it a little bit simpler. The way that Northwestern and the rural co-ops structure their rates is different in a subtle but important way that can make it more or less favorable for solar. So you just want to be sure that it kind of matches your use. I always like to see the price before incentives. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. And then you want to be sure that it just has good warranty, top quality materials, stuff like that. I will say I've been really impressed with just the quality of work that all the solar installers in Montana do. It's a very good, high quality professional industry here in the state. So the quote that Solar Montana gave me looked great, checked all those boxes, so we'll go ahead and get into it. So when you're thinking about this, there's really three key pieces of information, and that is how much the system costs, how much electricity you're going to produce, and what your electric rate is. There's also a lot of little pieces that go into this, which is one reason I spent a lot of time writing up a spreadsheet about it. We are trying to predict the future, right? Like you talk about the financial performance of solar, you're talking about what's going to happen over the next 25 years. And some of those assumptions are more important than others. I'm not going to get into that too much. I do talk about it a little more in the report. The big one that I'll highlight is what you think is going to happen to electricity prices, right? Because you're avoiding having to buy this electricity. It's over the last 30 years, the price increase has been very consistent. It's basically kept up with inflation. Is that going to continue for the next 30 years? I don't know, right? And that's an important assumption. For all the calculations I did, I just went ahead and said that, it's essentially going to keep up with inflation. So the first one of those is the cost. Pretty straightforward. Like I said, I like to look at the total system cost. If you can read that, it's right up at the top there. And then below that are the tax credits that Ben mentioned. The important thing to remember about the tax credits is you have to be able to realize those, right? Like they're what is called non-refundable tax credits. So they can bring your liability down to zero, but they're not going to actually cut you a check. And that's why it's important to kind of check with your tax preparer to kind of think it through, make sure that you can actually use all of that tax credit. And the other one is that the state credit, you want to be sure that matches your situation. That credit is $1,000 for a couple, $500 for one person. So it's good, I think, to look at the top line pre-incentive cost as a way to compare between bids, and then also to make sure that you're going to be able to get those incentives. So the second piece of information is how much electricity you're actually going to produce. This is going to really be a function of the size of the system, and then also which way it's kind of pointed, right? Like which angle from the vertical and which way points on the compass rose. And then also the specifics of your situation. Do you have a great tree? Like I would never advise anybody to cut a tree down to put a solar panel up. But maybe that's going to shade a little part of your system. So this is, the number is kind of buried in there. But what you're looking for is the annual production. And like Ben was saying, that's going to be in units of kilowatt hours. It's a unit of the total energy. So you want to be sure that it just includes an estimate of that. And then finally, electric rate. I'll just make that same point again, that there is this subtle difference between the way the utilities bill that's important. Essentially, on Northwestern, you pay a very low fixed monthly fee, and then you pay a lot per kilowatt hour. On the co-ops, that tends to be reversed. You pay a relatively high fixed fee, and then a relatively low per kilowatt hour fee. Now, the economic return on your solar panel is in the avoided electricity cost, right? So if you pay a low per kilowatt hour rate, it's not quite as favorable. Anyway, I won't say too much more about that. Really, the only question there is, are you on Northwestern or are you on a co-op? Like Ben was saying, a lot of this can be done with this great online tool from the National Renewable Energy Lab. This is really good if you want to just do a back of the envelope, first pass, is this something I should look into more? You can just put in basically your zip code, and that's about all the information it needs. If you want to go further, you can put in your address, and you can actually draw a little system on your roof, and it'll tell you how much electricity you're going to produce. So it's really an excellent piece of work, and very good for a first estimate. If you want to consider it more seriously, I would always recommend having an installer come out and really do a full analysis. But this is a good way to get started. So those are the kind of the three key inputs, right? Cost, production, and then your electric rate. There's kind of three key outputs that I would think about. And those are the monthly savings, how long it's going to take to pay back, and then the IRR, or the return on investment. And I'll kind of go through each one of these and explain them a little bit more. I will say that I did spend a lot of time writing this spreadsheet. I may be the only person in the world who's ever going to end up using this, but it is available on our website. It does work really well. I think it's very slick. And all of the calculations I'm going to talk about can be done on this spreadsheet. If you want a third party or kind of transparent system. That being said, all of these pieces of information will probably be included in the quote that you get from an installer. So I'll kind of highlight where those come out in the quote as well. And again, these are the kind of the three key inputs and the three outputs. And talking about all those other little knobs you can twiddle is all the stuff below on those inputs. I kind of had to put everything in there and then play with it for a while so I could figure out which ones really moved the needle and which ones didn't make such a big difference. And it turns out that those three on the top are really the ones you want to focus on. So the first metric is the monthly savings. And this graphic just kind of makes the obvious point that you're producing a lot more electricity in the summer than you are in the winter. No real surprise there. It's about six times as much during the summer. So when I talk about monthly savings, I take the whole annual total and just average it out. And on the quote that Solar Montana gave me, that was about a 10 kilowatt system, so a pretty large system. That would cover that would cover a large house. For their system, I ended up with a monthly savings about $120, 127. So that's kind of the range you're going to be talking about. This is quite a large system, 10 kilowatts. If you're going to put up a 5 kilowatt system, which is probably more typical, I would say, of the stuff that's been done, you'd be looking at about half of that, so maybe $60 a month. I will say that if you do finance the system through any one of our loans, you will probably find that the loan payment is higher than your savings. We're not quite to the point where you can take a loan and it's going to pay for itself yet. And then just to pull this out, in the quote that they gave me, they gave the current average monthly electric bill, good, looking at your situation, with solar and without solar. So the difference there is about $124. So we're off by $3, but there's so many assumptions that go into this, that we're calling that the same number. The second one I would look at is the payback, right? How long until the system is actually paid for itself? Again, pretty simple concept. There's a couple of subtly different ways to calculate it. It doesn't really matter. They're all going to do pretty much the same thing. And if you know how much the system costs, you know how much money you're saving every month. It's a pretty simple math problem there. On this system, I ended up with a payback of about 8.3 years. These will change with the price of your system. Prices are coming down, so I can't promise that this is exactly the performance you're going to see. But it is worth shopping around for. So likewise, you can run this through my little spreadsheet, or you can also look through the quote And down here on the bottom, simple payback in years, they came up with 9. So we could get into the details of how to calculate these or the assumptions, but those are basically in the same area. And if you do have any questions about what actually goes into this stuff, I did include all the calculations in the back of the report I wrote in case you want to get into the math. I'm more than happy to do that afterwards too. We can get into the weeds. So finally is what I call here the IRR, the internal rate of return. You can just think of this as the rate of return. I'll do my best not to get into the details, although I think they're quite interesting. It turns out this is not a completely simple concept, right? Like, what is the rate of return on investment? It's sort of intuitively simple, but if you actually start doing the math and really defining what you're doing, it turns out to be a little more complicated. The metric I chose here is the IRR. There's a long, fascinating history about IRR, if you're into that kind of thing. These people write articles in the business literature about the assumptions that go into it. They can't really agree on if certain things are even exist with it. It's problematic in certain applications. Anyway, I'll just say in this situation here, this really is the way you would intuitively think of the return on an investment. You're going to invest a certain amount of money in a solar panel. How much money are you going to get back, right? And so this actually is a number from the last time I gave the slide. The number I got on this quote was not 12%, it was 11.5%. But I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this because this is really kind of gets at the core of the matter, right? Which is one way to think about solar is as a pure investment. I mean, there's a lot of good reasons to put solar up beyond the finances, but I am the finance guy, so I'm going to talk about that. You can think about this like, okay, I've got $10,000, right? I could buy a treasury, I could invest in a mutual fund, or I could buy solar. Like, how do you compare all those? And that's what this metric here does. On the left here is a 20-year treasury, which if you pay attention to this stuff, is paying very, very little money and has for a long time. On the right side is the last, I believe 25, maybe 30 years of the stock market, total stock market. And the reason there's 2 sets of bars is just to make the point that when you install solar, you're actually, the money you're saving is after-tax money, right? Like, you're avoiding having to purchase electricity with money that you've already paid taxes on. So when you're comparing that to other investments, you need to take those tax implications into account. So depending on your tax bracket, that modifies the returns a little bit. So with this 11.5 IRR, that's actually quite a bit higher even than the lagging performance of the stock market. Again, this was a very good quote. I've run this with some higher numbers. When I wrote the report, I used a $3 a watt price, and in that case, the rate of return was about 7%. So kind of in between a treasury and the total stock market. And this kind of makes sense, right? Because it's when you think about investments, the 2 things you always hear about are risk and return, right? So here's the return. In terms of the risk, I think putting it somewhere between a treasury and the stock market is more or less appropriate. The systems are under warranty. We've got a very good idea of how much the sun is going to shine, although the weather might be changing a little bit, not enough to really make a difference. But we basically have a pretty good idea of what those systems are going to be producing. The primary risk is that there's going to be a change to the net metering structure Ben was talking about. It's not impossible that the utility at some point would say something like, listen, we're not going to give you the full retail rate for net metering. We're going to pay you 5 cents a kilowatt hour. This actually happened recently in Nevada. Their Public Service Commission made a very severe cut to the reimbursement rate. Overnight, the major solar installers basically packed up shop, said, we're done, we're out of here. It ended up being very contentious, several years of protests, a lot of litigation. They finally came to an agreement where they reinstated most of the original rate, and things are looking pretty good. But I would say that's really one of the fundamental risks here. Other than that, there might be unexpected costs. If you need to replace some inverters, say, or if you do need to do some roof work and have that system taken off and put back on. But generally, you know what's going to happen. So, long story short, pretty comparable investment performance at this point to something like investing in a total stock market fund, relatively low risk. So, pretty solid financial performance. That being said, the other thing I'll say about this though is that unlike a mutual fund, you can't buy a solar system, get 7% return for a couple of years, and then decide you want to sell it and invest in something else, right? With that 8 or 9 year payback, it takes to that point before you've even actually started to generate a positive return. So this graphic here is the rate of return on the y-axis, and then just the project time on the x. So you can see it's actually in a negative return until you've reached that payback period and start generating a positive income. So it is a longer term investment for sure. That may lead you to ask, well, what happens if I'm going to sell my house, right? Most of the average tenure in a house is something less than 25 years, certainly. This is a difficult question to answer for a lot of reasons. Very complicated, takes a lot of data. These folks at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab have sort of done the best job I've seen so far, and they wrote a report about it here. The takeaway from that is basically there's a tremendous amount of variation, right? You never know what is going to make a seller want to buy your house or buy it for certain values. Does it look great, or is it the countertops, is it the whole thing? So very difficult to say, a lot of variation. Basically, they found that houses, on average, tended to recover the cost of the solar system when they sold. So my takeaway from that was, we're going to call this a wash when considering the investment return. So probably get the money you put into it back out, but I wouldn't count necessarily on a big appreciation there. So just to wrap that up, a lot of variables there, but primarily I would think about the cost, the production, and then making sure I knew what kind of rate I was paying for electricity. The major output metrics I look for would be the payback, the monthly savings, and the IRR. Again, if you want to read this with a little more detail, hopefully people find this report to be useful. And I also address a number of other questions in there that I'm not going to have time for right now, such as, should you buy now or wait for prices to go down? I guess I'll address them briefly. No, it's better to go ahead and just buy it now rather than wait for a year and continue to purchase electricity. But I back that up with numbers. Should you take should you pay with cash or take a loan? That depends on what else you'd be doing with the money, essentially. And what type of loan is best. We also offer a home equity loan. If you itemize deductions on your taxes, a home equity loan can be beneficial. Otherwise, probably not worth the trouble. That is the short version. So with that, I will wrap it up. I'm more than happy to talk about any of this if you want to find me after this, and I think we can field questions now, not just for me, but for the whole crew here.